So here is the result from tracking the points of the point cloud generator. And what we have is this beautiful butterfly wing looking thing, which should be a much more accurate representation, or at least more detailed representation of that slope we want to patch up, right? Okay, with this point cloud, now we are arriving at the more interesting part of this workflow that I want to showcase with the exercise, and that is to generate a mesh for this directly within Nuke based on that point cloud. And that is something we'll try with the node that is just a couple nodes down on that same list of 3D geometry, PoissonMesh underneath that point cloud generator. Now, what this is going to do is, as soon as I plug it in, it'll take the reference of these points almost as if a suggestion for vertices, and it'll try to triangulate an average of that spatial representation. And what we get is this, which in certain cases, you might see that generated mesh actually giving you even a lot more than what you ask for, even more than what we're having right now. Sometimes, depending on the spatial distribution of that denser point cloud that you're meshing, you could absolutely have the Poisson mesh almost kind of folding onto, kind of enclosing onto itself. And in those cases, it could be quite difficult, next to impossible, to completely clean up the unwanted areas by just tweaking its parameters. So for that reason, and then for the other reason of actually improving a little bit on the topology that we're getting in the area of interest, like, for example, ironing out these little bumps, which were really the trees sticking out of that slope, which eventually we want to hide. That is why we're getting these captured as subtle kind of raised areas in that overall slope mesh. For these couple reasons, I will take this object in Maya and show you how we can prep it in a somewhat similar way as to what we did with the sphere, but without having to worry about any UVs. Okay, now, so that I can also point out to some of you who are, maybe not using this that workflow all that often yet, I will export not just that geometry, but also the camera. And an efficient way of doing that would be at present day either FBX or Alembic file formats. So let's write the geo, but this time include the camera as well. Let's take this file exactly to the same place where the source files are, and we'll call it nuke slope and camera, let's say, .abc for the Alembic file format. We'll turn off point clouds. I don't want to burden Maya with that. And that should be it. Let's execute for our range. It shouldn't take too long. And as soon as that file is done, we can jump in Maya and show you a couple of things there. Let's do that. We'll import the Alembic file format from the pipeline cache, not from file import like you would with, say, object or FBX. So let's go to Alembic cache, open Alembic, and find that folder. I'm not going to set up Maya project file and stuff like that because this is really the only thing I'm going to be doing here, just prepping that mesh. I'm not going to even save that Maya scene. So here's that ABC file, and we have something that looks just like what we had in Nuke's perspective view, only maybe with just a little bit more control to it. Now, let's get to the first task of clipping out the unnecessary faces. But the reason that would bring us to the point of why I wanted to also bring the camera here, and that is so that for example, if we split the viewer in the layout in maybe 3, splitting it right, I can show you the perspective view, maybe down here, and then look through that camera, the soft camera, maybe also indicate the resolution gate so that as we scrub back and forth, you can see exactly the relation of that geometry to the camera's vantage point and the area that we are interested in. Now, in order to be more precise, and in our case, in this specific example, I could probably pretty much eyeball it and still be okay with it. But in situations in which it's much more important to be precise when you select wanted and unwanted faces, you might want to do this, the following setup, where we're going to import as an image plane our backplate so that we can see how the wireframe overlaps over it, right? And we use that as a reference for selecting what we need. So let's see that. We'll go to View Image Plane and Import Image, since we have an image sequence. And go get that file. Project Files, Source, Loveland Pass, and select the first frame. And of course, we have to tell it to use this image sequence as a sequence, right? Instead of just as a single frame, because otherwise, no movement happening there. Let's use image sequence, and now the visuals should be matching. Okay, so that is the case in which now having this imported and kind of clearly showing over my footage, I could say, well, if I run a quick selection, say in the perspective view, and lasso around, let's see what, some of the denser areas of the mesh. And then I can look at it in the camera's view and see that, well, I can probably lose some faces from that selection. Control, murky around those. Similar stuff down here, probably. Also there. I basically get more precise, ever more precise in how I need to select areas, right? Having done that, I will Control-Shift-I to inverse the selection. You remember that from when we were modifying that sphere a few lessons back. Delete those faces, and let's take a look at it again in object mode. So we'll quickly switch with F8 back to the object mode, shaded mode with hitting 5 on the keyboard. And that might be enough. I don't even need this bit, pretty sure. So I'll get rid of that. Don't have to even be very precise selecting this area. I know that it's below what we want to work on. So now back to object mode, and now for the second step of what we wanted to do here, and that is to work with the maybe with the sculpt tool, the sculpt geometry tool, in order to iron out some of those bumps. Let's switch to smooth mode and take down the opacity to something that would be a gentle kind of influence on the geometry. Maybe increase the brush a little bit, and just quickly iron out some of those bumps that are more obvious where the trees were. Okay, with that done, let's take a look at that mesh. I can actually see a bit of a hole there. And the way that has happened is maybe it wasn't a completely closed mesh, and as I ran the smooth brush, it kind of separated some vertices. How about we fill that mesh and see if it would do it? Yep, that took care of it. And with the rest, I will just export that as just as an object file back for us to work with in Nuke.